Everybody to the latest edition of the Scholar Gypsies. I'm delighted today to have Mark O'Byrne with me. Mark's an expert, and his career has been in the financial sector, and he is the founder and owner of Tara Coins, gold and silver. So we're going to get into that a little later on. So, Mark, I suppose welcome. We've met and
Thanks,
we've
Ray.
bumped into each other over the last 4 or 5 years, and
Mm.
I suppose I want to have a chance to get you're an advocate for gold and silver here in Ireland, and we'll get into a little bit about that. But I suppose, what's your whole background in your career background?
Yeah, I actually studied history in UCD, and I was just fascinated with how the world worked. A lot of it didn't make sense to me as a kid. I was trying to understand what's going on in the world, all these wars and famines, and none of it made any sense because I could see so much abundance in the world, and yet there's poor children starving in Africa, So I was looking at history and just going, it keeps repeating. Why does it keep repeating, And then even in UCD, it was a lot of narratives to history, So I started going off grid and sort of studying my own history and sort of realizing it's all about empire, and empire is all about centralizing control for the kings, the queens, the lords, the ladies, the emperors, the empresses, So yeah, I loved history, and I did archaeology, and I did Irish folklore, mythology, and found it absolutely fascinating. Then my dad made me an offer I couldn't refuse and said, listen, come into my business, which was an employment agency, and he wanted to like semi-retire, and I went in there for a little while and didn't really find it that fulfilling. And there was a few things happening. Yeah, September 11th happened, and when that happened, I realized that there's a lot more risk in the world, shall we say, geopolitical risk, than people are aware of. And I started buying gold in the private capacity then, and I couldn't believe there's no one in Ireland selling it. I had to buy from companies in the UK and in the US, And when I spoke to people, they laughed at me, literally, like my own dad. I remember in the pub in Cable Street, my dad and my uncle. And my dad was a businessman, and my uncle was an actor, and we were having a pint, and I said, I've got this idea for a business. I'm buying a few gold coins, and I think it'll do really well. The two of them literally laughed at me, like they're like, that's from the past. Gold is this thing from the past. What are you on about? Like you're mad, like that. You're wasting your time, And that was everybody, all my friends, everybody. And it was funny. I've always been a bit of a contrarian. I've always been sort of doubting Thomas and want to put my finger in the holes and really understand things. But the more people sneered at it and the more people laughed at it, the more I said there's an opportunity here, because from a contrarian perspective, you buy what things that people don't value or they don't see the value of, and they're not buying them. And then when everybody's buying it and everybody's talking about it, when everyone says you can't go wrong with that, you have to buy that, that's probably overvalued. It's probably become overbought, maybe, So anyway, I set a company, anti-finance. For a period of time, I was asking questions about the financial system and realized the whole system was a bit of a Ponzi. It's basically a giant debt-based Ponzi, the fiat currency system, So I got into gold and silver because it was anti-finance. It was interesting, because I didn't have any time for bankers, and I started warning people about the property bubble quite early on, about 2005, 2006. I was saying, listen, there's a big property bubble in the US, in the UK, and especially in Ireland. I mean, that company, that was Gold Cores, the company I found in 2003. So it became the largest gold broker in Ireland. We had €1 billion in turnover, so it was quite a big, and about 15 employees. But people go, "Wow, €1 billion in turnover!" But the margins are so tight in gold and silver, and by the time all the employees were paid, by the time all the tax were paid, didn't make a huge amount of money in it, And it was funny, we were young guys who were always focusing on the sales, and I was always passionate about just trying to help people. So I knew that gold and silver would protect people from the various financial, but more the monetary risks in the world. That people are aware of sort of geopolitical and financial risks. There might be a property crash or a stock market crash or whatever, but they're not aware of the monetary risks, that the currencies are being devalued all the time. So I was very passionate about that, and I was writing a daily market update, a daily blog, nearly every single day for many, many years. I'm trying to get it into the media and being censored, and really having to push and go and meet business journalists and business editors and say, guys, you have to cover this. Why aren't you covering this? And they're still not covering it even today. It's amazing, Gerry. In the last few months, last year, gold's hitting record highs every month, new record highs, and RTE, BBC not covering it. And then if something negative happens, gold, silver, they fell very sharply there on January 30th. Boom, front page, gold crash, So I could see how the media was always always anti-gold and silver, and they actually call people names like gold's a barbaric relic. You're a gold bug if you believe in gold, you advocate gold. So it was interesting that you see the narratives, the same narratives that the powers that be, whether it be Wall Street or City of London and the people behind the scenes who are pulling the strings, shall we say, they don't want the people having gold and silver. They don't want the people having land. They want to monopolize that for themselves, and as we know, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So, but who will own it is the question, So, yeah.
Just there, Mark. When you set up Goldcore, what was your client base? What type of person or what type of corporates were buying gold back in that period of time?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, good question, because there was no corporates, and there's very few corporates today. The corporates don't tend to get it. It tended to be sort of businessmen, farmers, people who know how hard it is to make a few bob in the modern world, So, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, people, it was generally men between the age of 40 and 70, and they'd made a few bob, and they were worried. They were quite aware that there's risks in the world. I can't leave this in the bank because there's inflation. And then there's bail-in risk that came out after the financial crisis. And then, they just didn't trust stocks and bonds type of thing. The traditional thing is financial markets is put it into the so-called balanced portfolio, 60% equities, 40% bonds, But these guys were self-made guys. So a lot of them would actually be property guys as well. They would tend to prefer the tangible assets and be quite independent of mind, because they tend to do their own research and be self-driven, I suppose, and not be following what whatever expert is saying in the Irish Times and Financial Times, because the experts in the Irish Times, Financial Times were telling them gold's a barbaric relic for doom and gloom merchants. They were really, really anti. It's amazing, And even now, you think they'd have the graciousness to sort of go, "Geez, we got that wrong," but they don't, because gold is like the Achilles heel of the entire monetary system, which is a Ponzi system, And the central banks themselves are quietly buying gold, but they don't want the masses knowing that they're buying gold, because as the masses wake up to what's happening, it's like the empire has now closed, and the masses go, "Jesus, why are these guys?" The European Central Bank, European Monetary Union member banks, central banks, including Poland, are buying a lot of gold. It's not just the Chinese and the Russians who are buying a huge amount of gold as well, particularly the Chinese. We've no idea how much the Chinese are buying, but it's believed the Chinese may have over 10,000 metric tons now. So the big money in the world, the sovereigns are buying gold. The central bank gold buying has gone from 1,000 metric tons to 10,000 metric tons a year. It's gone up 1,000% since 2010, So the inside money, who's actually responsible for the euros that we have in our bank accounts, they're buying gold. The masses don't know this, because it hasn't been reported, So, and then the financial advisors are basically about flogging products. They have financial products they want to sell, and they earn commissions on those products. So they want to sell their stock product, their bond product, whatever it is, and they make 2% to sell it, and then sometimes they make an ongoing on it, And good luck to them, but they tend to downplay the risks that are in these products, because I had to look under the bonnet, so to speak, of these financial products, including the exchange traded funds. And basically these product providers, investment product providers, they've indemnified themselves for many of the risks that you would own gold. So if you say buy a gold ETF or exchange traded fund, they've indemnified themselves with risks from terrorism, war, natural disasters, whatever it is. So the product buyer, has all the risk, So yeah, a lot of the financial advisors, they put people into 60% equities, 40% bonds. The bonds, most of the governments are bankrupt, so those bonds can become worthless in the next 3, 5, 10 years, and I think a lot of them will become worthless, because the scale of debt, we might get into. I think the key thing to talk about is the scale of the debt in the world, But the stock markets look very, very vulnerable as well, And it's all based on liquidity and near 0% interest rates. Yeah.
Just a couple of things there. What you brought up, kind of questions in my head, because I know next to nothing about these markets and what's really going on in the financial world. But two things there is, well, the first one that strikes me: does the Irish government have a gold reserve at the moment?
They do, yeah, and they actually increased it a small bit. And when they did, I used it as an opportunity to get onto the media and say, "Lads, did you see this? This is important. You should cover this," And I think they did. One of the papers, the Irish Independent, they cover. So I can't remember what it is, Gerry. It's tiny, like it could be 20, something like 20 metric tons. I think they might have increased it by about 8 metric tons in the last few years. But it was interesting. I think Pascal O'Donoghue was asked about it when the media covered it, and Pascal O'Donoghue said that it's, I think the word he used was something like a reserve of safety or something like that. So that's interesting. That came from our own Minister for Finance, you know. But then there doesn't seem to be any follow through. You get this, you know, odd article every few years, you know, and no one joins the dots and realizes, hang on, if the Irish Central Bank's buying gold, surely it makes sense for some of the Irish people to have a little bit of gold as well, you know. But it's like they want them in the system, you know. The system is about supporting the banks, so keep the deposits in the banks. We don't want to run in the bank, lads. Don't be pointing out unpleasant truths about the fiat currencies, you know. So they want, and then they want money in the stocks because that supports the corporations, and they want money in the bonds that supports the governments. So basically, it's about supporting the banks, the corporations, and the governments, the cash deposits, the stocks, and the bonds. Whereas when people buy gold, they're in effect taking their it's become a giant casino. It's like they're taking their chips out of the casino. They're saying, right, we don't trust this anymore. Most people who buy physical gold are saying we don't trust this, and we're taking our money, our hard-earned money, out of the system and put into real money. Because as you know, fiat currency is just, it used to be paper, and paper's for paupers, and that's in common law. Paper is for paupers. So gold and silver are real money. They've been real money throughout history. We can talk about that. So now they're trying to transition from paper to digits, and that's even more risky, because at least if you've got, you know, a few 50-euro notes in your back pocket, you know, cash is king, as they say, in periods of time. But if you just have digits on your iPhone, your Bank of Ireland, your AIB, as we know, there's a lot of risk in the digital side of things. The technocracy owns the technology, basically, and we saw that in the lockdowns, and you know, how they can use, and they're trying to create a digital control grid, in effect, you know. So, like, I'm very pro technology, and I see this huge potential with technology, and the nexus of, and you've covered this as well, the blockchain is obviously hugely interesting and can be hugely beneficial for people, these technologies, if they're in the right hands. But it's all about control, and if it's controlled by giant billionaire oligarchs, which it seems to be right now, then it's going to be used for their benefit, not for the benefit of the masses, you know.
So would you see the major cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, XRP, and one or two more as that, like, you know, Bitcoin's origin story is opaque, to say the least. How do you view the whole crypto? You know, we're told, or we read that kind of, I forget the exact numbers, but I think the gold market was like a $10-15 trillion market. And I don't know what Bitcoin currently is, maybe a trillion. That there was going to be a transition to this, you know, digital gold. Where would someone like you be on, you know, Bitcoin specifically, but the whole crypto market? You look at that as just a Ponzi scheme, as it exists at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately how it's become. Yeah, I was quite positive on Bitcoin in the early days. I actually was one of the first people to write about it in Ireland, because I saw it did have some of the properties of gold. They tried to mimic the properties of gold in terms of obviously being decentralized, being private, and also the supply, like with 21 million, you know. So I saw the benefits of it from a libertarian perspective, you know. And you know, even the whole thing that initially it was meant to be a currency, and they used it to buy pizza, you know, in the early days. So it was interesting, and I was interested, and I actually spoke at a conference down in Kerry. Fexco, the financial service provider, had a conference about blockchain and crypto, and it was the first blockchain crypto conference in Ireland. And I can't remember when it was. I think it was around 2016, 2017, something like that. And it was Dave McWilliams and Dr. Brian Lucy from Trinity and myself, and I gave the presentation on blockchain and Bitcoin. And I basically told everybody there, everybody should buy a tiny amount of Bitcoin, because, you know, there will be a place for cryptocurrencies in the future. And the blockchain is very exciting, and I'm more excited by the blockchain than I'm about Bitcoin per se. But, you know, to me, it was a sort of a low risk bet that I thought could do very, very well. And I said, I think it's binary. I think Bitcoin can go to 1 million, or it can go to zero. To me, there's no halfway with Bitcoin type of thing. You know, there might be now, because Wall Street and BlackRock have the ETFs, so it's become a sort of a speculative digital asset for Wall Street players. You know. So
does that make it kind of abusable? You know, the price. You know, the price. You know, we've seen Bitcoin probably drop 50% since July of last year to today, or if not 50, close on it, and it has that kind of attraction for gamblers, if you like. You'll get, not Bitcoin per se, but the crypto market is like, people seem to think that you go in and they'll 10x their fucking whatever they put in within X amount of time, and that doesn't. It seems more of a roller coaster.
It is, and also it is a form of gambling, I think, and a very casino like the whole thing, especially all these dodgy coins and NFTs and all sorts of mad stuff. And I think Trump has his own ones now. So what's going on, Gerry, with that is I think they're using a stable coin, like they're trying to move from the petrodollar, because the petrodollar, they used the pricing of oil in dollars to support the dollar and to ensure that there was demand for dollars internationally by pricing oil in dollars. They realized the petrodollar is coming to an end. And obviously Saudi Arabia seems to be, we're moving to a multipolar world. I'm very pro-American, and it's sad to see that America has lost its way a bit. Hopefully they'll get back on track, but it was a great country, but it has become less of a republic and more of an empire, shall we say, so hopefully they will find a way again. But they're trying to transition to these stable coins now, because the stable coins, you have to buy treasuries and buy dollars in order to buy or to create these other stable coins, So that creates a new, almost artificial demand for US treasuries. So that's why Trump and some of the people in his administration are pushing cryptos and to a degree Bitcoin. But yeah, it is, unfortunately, it has become a very speculative and just a way for very wealthy people to become more wealthy, and it is dominated by whales. There are a few, like I've been surprised that Bitcoin has fallen by as much as it has, because I thought with BlackRock having ETFs that they can move markets and they can manipulate markets, especially in the short term. And they did this with gold and silver over the years. And that's what put a lot of people off gold and silver, because I had people say to me, well, why would I buy that? They can manipulate it. And I said to them, well, they can manipulate in the short term, absolutely. But in the medium and long term, there's 9 billion people on this planet. And a lot of those 9 billion people, particularly in Asia, actually believe in gold and silver as money. And they're going to keep buying gold. So the more the bankers push the price down, the more the Chinese and the Indians and people in Asia and the Middle East go, oh, thank you very much. And they're smart. They buy in the dips. You see my company, unfortunately, no matter how much I told people to cost average and to buy in dips and gradually buy and accumulate whenever there was weakness in the price, people would say, oh, Jesus, it's fallen, it could fall more. And it's like, it could fall more, but you need to take a long-term view, So, but they didn't. They would always buy. When gold hit record highs and it was on the front page of the FT, we would be hugely busy. Phones ringing off the hook. People want to buy, And we're a small little company, so phones ringing off the hook was only a tiny minority of. It's interesting. They believe it's less than 1% of people in the Western world own physical gold, so it's tiny. And as recently as 1980, they believe as much as 20% of people in America own physical gold. Mm-hmm. So the ownership of physical gold has been going down and down and down over the years because people have been putting more money into the stocks and the bonds and into the so-called the wealth management industry, and so-called balanced portfolios, because they've been conditioned and told that gold is risky. It's a volatile commodity. I heard people saying that for years. You're betting on gold. It's like, well, how come when you buy property you're not betting? It's like, so they make gold out the gold speculative, but buying property or apartments or stocks and bonds aren't speculative. They're investing. They're hard-nosed, rational investors. So it's interesting. There's a lot of narratives, anti-gold narratives. The other narrative is that it's sort of doom and gloom merchants. They're sort of greedy. They're hoarding gold, and they're sort of a bit antisocial. It's like, well, it's okay for this, not for the little people, So it's very, very interesting.
You bring up 2 points there, Mark, or raised kind of 2 issues as you're talking about crypto and gold. That would be questions in my mind, but you referenced, that Bitcoin has a set limit of about 21 million coins. Two points want that raise my head is one on custody for both gold and silver, and a side point, as in, when people buy gold, do they take physical delivery of it, or how does that work? But similarly, I read somewhere that, of that 21 million Bitcoins, there's about 2 million coins forever lost in the ether,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of custody's gone, whatever device it's on, or, that it's lost, basically.
Yeah.
And I suppose one of the questions that was raised, I think, by Elon Musk, maybe when Trump got elected first, because he was on about trying to get into Fort Knox, is do we have an accurate picture of what the current gold reserves globally are?
Well, we do. We have official statistics and sources, and how accurate it is, I don't know, but it could be fairly accurate. But like your point there, that was very interesting. What happened with Musk and Trump? Like when Trump was elected, they were shouting from the rooftops that they were going to go into Fort Knox and they're going to audit the Federal Reserve to confirm what the gold reserves were, and they were shouting it from the rooftops, X.com, and then that disappeared. So the question is, why did that disappear? Did it disappear because they realized maybe they don't have the gold that they claim they have, and therefore they said we better shut up talking about this because it could lead to even less trust in the dollar. The world there's a de-dollarization is happening. The data shows us that it's actually interesting. For the first time in a long time, 30 or 40 years, the total gold reserves now owned by central banks is worth more than the US treasuries, because the Chinese in particular have been selling the treasuries and they've been buying gold, and obviously the gold price is going up. So it's a combination of buying a certain amount of ounces, but also the gold appreciation. So how much gold is in the world? Like I was always told, and I think the official statistic still is, that all the gold in the world that's been mined since the dawn of time is about 22 meters cubed. So that's if you refine it and make it 49 pure, so 99.99% pure, that's 24 karat gold. So if you put that into one giant gold bar, they say that's 22 meters cubed, which would basically fit in the centre court of Wimbledon, just about, or maybe 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But I've been in vaults in the world, and I've seen quite a lot of gold in some of these big vaults. And I think it's more than that. I really think there must be more gold in the world than they're letting on, and I'm very pro gold, but I do think the supply is bigger than they're letting on. But it could be twice that or 3 times that. One way or the other, it's very, very right. So it's interesting, but they haven't. Yeah, so the New York Federal Reserve hasn't been audited since 1950. So potentially the gold is there, but there's a lot of speculation that they do a lot of leasing, gold leasing and gold swaps. So whenever the supply issues, they try and plug the gap, and they will lease gold out, and they'll try and flood the market with gold, and they do these swaps as well. So even if they have all the gold they claim to have, they claim they have 8,100 metric tons, which is around 260 million ounces. But as we said, it hasn't been audited since 1950. So, and Ron Paul, one of the most respected politicians, a true, libertarian, really, really good politician. He's been pushing, constantly asking for this and pushing for an audit, But even if they have that 8,100 metric tons, that could be accounted. There could be claims on that 2 or 3 times claims. So it's a bit of a Ponzi, and I think they're scrambling. I think they're probably buying gold quietly now as we speak, because they know the Chinese have been buying gold for years.
So, is the Chinese investment strategy on gold, is that tied into kind of this notion that the BRICS nations want to decouple from the US dollar?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they're very clear. They've said that at the highest levels, including Xi in China said that quite recently. I don't think they may create some sort of BRICS settlement currency to settle sort of trade balances. Obviously, a lot of them are big commodity producers, especially Russia. India's a big consumer of oil and natural gas. So they're already moving away from the dollar, and they're beginning to do more bilateral trading amongst themselves. So whether they can get their act together whereby they'd have a common gold-backed currency, I think that's a bit of a stretch. But I think the Chinese will probably pull it off, and I don't think they'll do a fully gold-backed yuan. It wouldn't be in their interest to do that. But they might do some form of partial backing of the yuan and say that we're backing the yuan with 30 or 40% gold backing, If that happens, then, that could put the dollar under pressure. So I think that's why and Trump knows this, and his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, knows this as well. And that's why they're talking about potentially revaluing their own gold reserves. So it's really interesting. The world today, now this hasn't been reported in the mainstream media. It's crazy. Gold is being remonetized. So gold has been money throughout history, and today gold is becoming money again. The central banks are buying gold, and they're buying gold because they know that the dollar is at risk, and they've been buying dollars as the reserve currencies for years because they needed to settle trade balances and to buy oil in particular, but all the other commodities as well. So now they're realizing that gold is is a superior form of money than the dollar. The Russian thing was huge when they confiscated the Russian dollar reserves. I can't remember. I think it was like 300 billion or something like that. And then they realized, okay, we thought they were our dollars. We worked our backsides off, and we had people working, and we were saving. That was the nation's savings. That was the Russians' national savings, if you will, that they had recycled into US dollar reserves, and they just got confiscated from them overnight, So I think that was a sort of a wake-up call to a lot of the sovereign nations around the world, saying we can't keep our money in dollars anymore because it can just be taken from us, In the same way, Bitcoin can potentially be taking people. There's like backdoors into most of these devices, iPhones, computers, all the rest, So like I'm very pro technology, but unfortunately a lot of the technology today is compromised, and that poses risks to Bitcoin as well, So, and to all forms of crypto. But hopefully in time we'll have more, I suppose we need more competition. We need more ethical tech operators, like tech companies that are coming up that are about being truly decentralized and truly allowing people to have privacy in their day-to-day lives. And then when we have that, hopefully we can have, I think gold and silver and the blockchain could be really interesting if it's done in an ethical way and it's fully backed by gold and silver in very secure vaults. Sorry, that was a question you asked before about how do you know. That's the custody question you asked there, Gerry, which is very, very important, because gold's a safe haven asset. History shows that throughout history. It does particularly well in uncertain times, and it goes down in certain times when the economy is doing well and everybody's doing well. So there's less need for gold. People trust the governments, they trust the corporations, they trust in the system, shall we say. But when the system breaks down, or there's wars, or trade wars, currency wars, actual hot wars, then people go to gold, But so gold is a safe haven asset, but it's only a safe haven if you own it in the safest way. So the safest way to own it is possession is 9/10 of the law. So I've long told people, take possession of gold and silver, even a few silver coins, whatever you can afford, It's a great way to save for a rainy day. And there's something really, I don't know, powerful is the word I was going to use, powerful, but it is when people hold in their hand, they sort of go, there's almost a eureka moment frequently when people hold in their hand, they go, okay, now I get it, it is money. There's an energetic thing, It's interesting. Even in Ireland, the history of it in Ireland is really interesting because we were colonized in a big way. They shut down, like the Vikings had a mint here in the 9th century. It was the first mint in Ireland, but we were using piasa arrogate. So that was little pieces of silver. Basically, we had like Saint Bridget, not just Saint Bridget, the goddess Bridget and Saint Bridget are both associated with both the water and the fire. And that's what happens in a forge. In the forge, the smith would use the fire to melt down the metals, to purify the metals, and then the hammer and the evil and the water to craft them into whatever instance they're using. It could be beautiful works of art, they could be weapons, it could be utensils, all about civilization. Metals gave us a huge quality of life, but we've really disrespected metals for a long time. It's like seen as this sort of dirty thing from the past, So it was a huge part of our culture in Ireland. It was taken away from us, like a lot of things were taken away from us, So yeah, possession. Yeah, we use piasa. It's funny, like when I studied monetary history, they kept telling me that we use cows as money. And I was like, how could that work? We use cows as money, like it doesn't make any sense, It's like, because first of all, not everybody could afford a cow, like you're obviously doing fairly well to have a cow, but you couldn't trade a cow, So they were using sophisticated forms of barter, and they were using metals, little pieces of it. It's really interesting. The words, Gerry, are for gold, it's arrogate bui. So it's the yellow or gold money, arrogate bui, and then silver money is arrogate gyal, and then the copper money is arrogate rua, the red money of the earth, And gyal is associated with the moon. It's really interesting. So the gold is associated with the sun, the silver is associated with the moon and water, gold, sun, and fire, and then copper is earth and Venus. It's the red metal. So it's a really big part of our culture, and we've sort of forgotten about it. If you go into the National Museum, you can get glimpses of it. These torques that they had, these are beautiful breastplates, and they had ring money as well called fáine, gyal, and lei. So fáine was these rings, and they found these, like in archaeological excavations, they found like hordes of these, like hundreds and hundreds of these little rings, So they were using little rings in exchange, So yeah, it was a bit. It's called piasa arrogate. So I think they weren't. We didn't have the technology to purify the metals, and we didn't have the technology to put them into beautiful coins, stamped coins, But the Vikings brought that in the 9th century. Then we had it in the 12th century with the early Normans. But then gradually the Crown in London, they wanted to centralise everything into the Royal Mint in London. They shut down all the mints in Ireland. Those mints in Dublin, in Drogheda, in Limerick, I believe in Waterford as well. It's the history of money is really, really interesting, and the history of minting, because the kings, they always wanted to control the money supply. They put their faces, going back to Alexander the Great. When he invaded all the lands of the world, he would take the gold. One of the first things they do is take the gold and silver, bring it back into their own treasury. Ore is gold, treasury. They would bring the gold and silver to the treasury, and then they would melt it down, and then they would create their own coins, their own money, the Greek money of the Greek Empire. And Alexander the Great, egomaniac, all these people are egomaniacs, and they always love having their face on their own coin, So, and to this day, if you've got British coins, King Charles is on the coins that the Royal Mint produces, So it's really, really interesting. But so possession, yeah. But one thing with that is you have to feel very secure in your own home. If some people, it gives them sleepless nights, it's funny, they just don't feel, they may have been burglars in the past, or for whatever reason, they don't feel safe having gold and silver in your own home. And if you don't feel safe having your own home, then don't do it if it gives you sleepless nights. So if that's the case, then you put it into a safety deposit box in Dublin, or you put it into a very safe vault. Switzerland is the safest place in the world. It's decentralized government. The cantons, they don't have an overweening powerful executive. They don't have a big powerful federal government. They're very conservative. It's a very interesting place. They're conservative in a good way. They're interesting. They're quite similar to Irish people because they're up in the Alps. They were Celts. The Helvetii were Celtic people, and there's a lot in common between our two cultures and civilizations. Because they were up in the Alps, it was harder for the Roman Empire and the other empires that came along to really control them, because they're hiding out up in the mountains like we were hiding out in the mountains up in Wicklow and wherever else, So Switzerland, especially for larger amounts, I think it's important to have it in country. So have a safety deposit box in Dublin if you can afford it. And then if it's for slightly larger amounts, it's good to have in Switzerland. But the key thing is that it has to be in your name. It has to be what's called fully allocated, fully segregated. So you actually know that you own each individual coin and bar. And on the bars, you have serial numbers, and it's in your name. And if you do it that way, so I offer that again now in the new company, Tara Gold and Silver Limited, primarily in Switzerland. But I really want to get the coins into people's hands. And we might talk about the coins when you're ready.
My next question was just on that: is how did you transition from gold core, we'll say, into Tara coins? Because you brought in some of the Irish history in gold and silver, and that's fascinating to me, and I think to people maybe watching as well, because it sounds like a transition from just like a gold and silver company into something more kind of specifically Irish focused. Is that
the case? Yeah. Well, when I left, I suppose because I did a market update every single day for nearly 16 years, 2004 to 2020, because I was genuinely passionate about it. I knew it would protect people, and I was genuinely concerned about a lot of the risks, a lot of the corruption in the world, But by the end of it, I was just jaded, and I just said, I need a break from this gold thing, And I actually very passionate about health, because I saw, I had some quite wealthy clients, a handful of some of the wealthiest people in Ireland were our clients, some interesting, a lot of cultural people as well, cultural creatives who sort of just didn't trust the system for whatever reason, and so some very interesting people. But so I'd long had people saying to me, why are we buying, British gold coins with Queen Elizabeth on them, or why are we buying South African Krugerrands? Or it's interesting, like the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, the British, they all have their own legal tender, fiat currency, legal tender bullion coins. So the value is from the bullion, but they have a legal tender stamp on them, which is interesting because that's again the dominion of, that's the gold and silver. They want that to be of the government or of the central bank type of thing, So I had long had people. It was interesting. It wasn't just Irish people; it was actually Irish American people saying there should be Irish gold and silver coins. Why aren't there? So I looked into the history, and one of the big things why gold and silver isn't big in our culture, Gerry. There's a number of reasons, but one is we were obviously bankrupt when we got independence in 1922. We're absolutely bankrupt. Then we had a civil war, and so we didn't have any money. Even business people were working really hard just to make the few bob. You didn't have money that you could be investing, so to speak, and so why should you be buying gold? But I also think there's a deep-rooted psychological thing whereby we saw gold as the Brits took all the gold from our country, and I shouldn't say the Brits, the British Empire, the naughty elites at the top who were running the show, because the British people and the English people were victims themselves of some of these people at the top. It's always a few naughty headbangers at the top. So basically, the British Empire, had the gold standard, and I think in Ireland we said, all right, fuck you, you can have your gold. We've got the green field, we've got the land, and we're just delighted to have our country back and to have our land. I love that movie, The Field. It's really, the land is so important, and that feeds into our thing that we have this thing for property. We're a bit mad for property, and it's mad. It's okay to hoard property. You can have, you're a very successful property entrepreneur and he's fucking buying apartments left, right, and center. And we're mad for land and property. So they became our tangible assets of choice. But if you go to Germany, you go to India, you go to China, you go to most countries in the world, they buy gold and silver automatically. It's part of their culture, but it's not part of our culture at all. I think that's a big part of it, that we just felt like that's for those evil capitalists, these imperialists. That's their gold standard. We've got the punt. We've got our punt, which wasn't backed by anything, but it was backed by us, the people. And we're an agrarian economy, so it was backed by the land. It was backed by our hard work and creating, mostly agricultural produce in the 20s and 30s, and then gradually we industrialized. But the other thing is, taxation-wise, we had the VAT on gold bullion from the foundation of the state. So why would you buy gold if you're paying 20-25% VAT when you could buy land at 0% VAT? So there was also a taxation reason. So that for that reason, we didn't buy gold from the 1920s throughout history. Even today, there's only a tiny fraction of Irish people buy gold, and that's part of the reason that it's not in our culture, it's not in our DNA, and that's part of the reason why the media don't cover it, because it's not a conspiracy per se. It's more just culturally. A lot of the journalists and business journalists just don't get it. They don't understand it. They might read the Financial Times, the Economist, they might watch BBC. They think they're getting the news. They think they're getting the facts. But it's all quite sanitized and quite filtered is the word. It's all filtered.
Is gold? Is there still VAT on gold at the present day to buy it?
No, that's what's interesting, and that's what really I that's why I realized this is a big opportunity in around 2000, 2001 when I started researching it. I was actually researching before September 11th, and then September 11th happened, and I knew that was going to be used then to create this clash of civilizations. And they're still trying to create clashes of civilizations, and it's all divide and conquer, But there was VAT up until 1999. It was very interesting. The EU brought in what was called the EU Gold Directive, which basically harmonized the treatment of investment grade gold. So, 24 karat bullion, it's actually 22 karat, sorry, so plus pure gold became VAT free in every single country in the EU because of the EU Gold Directive. It was very interesting. In the legal document, this directive, they actually said that this was being done to try and encourage the citizens to, I can't remember the exact words, but something like to own physical gold, So they're not all naughty ones, there are some good people at the top, but unfortunately the naughty ones have taken control over the years and seem to be in power right now. But there were good people who were basically realizing this is a good thing for the people. They realize it's good for the citizens to own a little bit of gold because it makes the society more resilient, because the people are sovereign then. You're not dependent on the banks or on the stock market or the bond market. It's having, you cannot be sovereign. You cannot have a sovereign people unless they own land, they own gold, they own silver. So the sorry, what was the question there? It was
the thing that put into my head there is, you were, what year you moved into, when was this transition to Tara coins?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
And just on that, the coins, the coins are beautiful. How are you minting them, or how does that process work for you?
Well, yeah. So I had Irish people saying we should be buying Irish coins. Why aren't they? Why don't we have them? So I've explained why culturally what happened there. There was forces of empire, and then we were bankrupt, and culturally and taxation. So, and then I had Irish Americans as well saying to me, why can't we buy gold coins? We don't want to buy South African coins, whatever. So, but I went away into health, and health is true wealth. I saw, Gerry, many times over the years, people, they had all the money in the world, they shouldn't have a care in the world, and they'd be coming in and they'd be scared. 2012, they thought the end of the world was nigh, the whole thing's going to collapse, and they were just fear all the time, And I was going, yeah, maybe that could happen, but it's highly unlikely. But yeah, just own a few gold coins and just go off on holiday and relax. Like, you've got so much money, and you people are just worried about all these. So I realized, yeah, health is important. So I started doing sort of stuff about meditation and breath work and all that good stuff. But I realized I didn't have any network in that space. I didn't have any qualifications. It's actually quite a competitive space, and I realized, yeah, it's not my thing. It's not my Dharma. People, they're like, who the fuck's this guy talking about meditation? This gold guy talking about meditation. Yeah. And so anyway, long story short, I had a few people saying to me, and people who I quite respect, and people who are quite spiritual, saying, your stuff is gold and silver. That word Dharma is an interesting word. It's basically what's your purpose in life, what's your calling. And I was resistant to it. I really didn't want to do it. I was like, I'm sort of done with the gold and silver. I just want to spend much time with the kids as possible, and try and help people with the health side of things, because health as well. But anyway, long story short, people said, I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I suppose I might do gold and silver coins. And then it was like, well, that's what you have to do. And I was like, okay, that's what I have to do. So I realized, okay, that's what I'm going to do, So yeah, because I love coins. Interesting when the history of, it's called numismatics. Numismatics is basically the collection of coins. And when you have a coin in your hand, even an ancient Roman coin or an ancient Greek coin or any ancient coins, you can look at the symbols on the coins. You can say, okay, you can find out who was in power, what was happening at the time. Was he a good emperor? Was he a bad emperor? What was the motivation? What was the intent? And it's really, really interesting. So anyway, I said, right, I'm going to create here. I'll show it you, because picture paints 1,000 words. So, but I can talk to them blue in the face. But so that's basically they're the first Irish 4-9 pure. So it's 99.99% pure physical silver. So that's arrogate. And arrogate is interesting because that's the Irish word for silver, and it's the Irish word for money. Arrogate, because we use piasa arrogate throughout history. In every single country in the world. It's really, really interesting. Yeah, so I really said, right, what are the sacred symbols of Ireland? And there's a few of them. And with hindsight, when I look back now, I actually wish I'd done the Celtic cross, because I was down with you in Clonmacnoise, and that was a beautiful time we had down there. And the Celtic cross is just a beautiful symbol of Christianity and Celtic Christianity, So, but the Tree of Life is an amazing symbol as well. It's actually in every spiritual tradition, including in it's a huge, obviously, in the Christian tradition, and it's not just the tree of judgment with the Adam and Eve and the apple, it's actually in the end of the book of Revelations, and we're in the time of Revelations now. So at the end of the book of Revelations, people think Revelations is all, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and it's all death and pestilence and all this fucking doom and gloom stuff, and there is some scary stuff in Revelations, but at the end of Revelations, it's this beautiful redemptive vision of John. And it's called the New Jerusalem. So in the New Jerusalem, it's basically, they talk about the water of life and the tree of life. So Ishkabaha is the water of life. It's not fucking whiskey, which used to poison myself drinking Ishkabaha. Don't you? You'd be drinking a half bottle of whiskey, fucking knocking it back, thinking it's Ishkabaha. Baha is life, and Ishkabaha is the water of life. That is the tree of life. So it's on Crown Baha. And the tree of life, all goodness comes from nature, from organic food, organic vegetables, organic fruits. So at the end of the Bible, it talks about this tree of life and the medicine that would come from this tree of life. Food is medicine, not these drugs that are being peddled to people these days, So it's at the end of the book of Revelation, and it's this beautiful vision of, it talks about all the nations of the world being healed by the tree of life, So just this beautiful. The end of that book is just amazing, And people forget about, because a lot of the Bible, we tend to focus on all the scary stuff and the judgment and all the rest, but there's a real sense of abundance. So that is a symbol of abundance, and I put the apples on it because apples are abundance as well. And it's as above, so below. So that's the tree of life on Crown Baha, and it's big in the Druidic, the Celtic culture as well. And then the tri-spire is really interesting. I mean, I think that is the masculine, the feminine, and the child. I think that is the holy tree. People have different views on it. Some people think it's air, water, fire. It can be different elemental things, or past, present, future. And obviously, the sun is there, which is the energy of light. And then the harp is the energy of sound, the vibration of sound, the vibration of light. So I try to really capture the essence of God, in effect, and have reverence for these sacred symbols and what they symbolize. And then Éire is the Irish name for Ireland, and that comes from the goddess Eru, So they're sacred symbols. I mean, a picture paints 1,000 words, but a symbol has consciousness, it has frequency. So I'm really trying to help people to understand that we had this sort of really, really, we had an evolved civilization, you know, a really evolved culture. You had an amazing event. Was it the Tua Day festival, which was amazing because I think we're all remembering that we had periods of, you know, it's all cycles, you know. We had booms, we had busts, we had periods of abundance, and it was a land of milk and honey, and then we had periods of famines and wars, you know. But there were periods of time where we had very evolved civilization, including, I think, around the 5th, 6th century with St. Bridget, St. Columkill, St. Gubnit. It was really interesting. This is why we're called the land of saints and scholars, you know. So the symbols, like silver, I think silver and gold are going to become much more, people say expensive. It's funny when people say to me it's expensive, and I say, well, it's expensive relative to what? Like the price of property's gone through the roof, the stock market's gone to 50,000, the price of everything's going up. So, but gold and silver, actually, it's interesting. This is the key thing for people to understand. The price of gold and silver aren't going up. It's the value of the euro, the value of the dollar, the value of the pound. They're going down in value all the time, because economics is very simple, Gerry, but they try and confuse people. The PhDs and the so-called experts try and confuse people with all this jargon. Economics is very simple. It's supply and demand, but they don't apply that principle to the money and the money supply. And if you increase the money supply by trillions and trillions and trillions, which they are today, then that's a massive increase in the supply. Therefore, the value of that will go down, because, you know, it's simple economics. When supply goes up, the price goes down, you know. I mean, while the demand for gold and silver is going through the roof, you know. So,
well, we've seen over the last couple of years, like over the last 12 months or 18 months, that gold, which is kind of, you know, if you look at the trajectory of the pricing of it, you can see it has doubled, or both elements have doubled over the last, I don't know, 12 or 18 months. That usually, you know, in geopolitical terms, or even financial terms, means people are quite worried about the broader economies of the world. Do you see a cataclysmic, like, I would have, just if I was looking at gold and silver just as a kind of directional guide to what's coming, I would say the pricing of gold would indicate to me, notwithstanding that drop, you know, that one day drop or whatever, that there's something big coming in the financial markets and, you know, the economic worlds. Do you see it that way?
I do, yeah. Gold in particular, it's the ultimate barometer of risk. So when it goes up a lot, it generally means there's an increase in risk in the world, and we can see that every day, you know. And it's amazing how, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world, you know. And obviously, you know, I try to tune out most, because a lot of it is just, you know, people are getting just into fear-based consciousness in a huge way, because there are crazy things happening. There are very real risks. But so that's the gold and silver prices are reacting to that. But people need to tune it out. It's interesting that the media isn't joining the dots. Like, they're putting the fear of God into people about a lot of these things, you know, and people are really getting into fear, and that's creating division amongst people as well. And they can't think rationally, but they're not joining the dots in terms of, well, what are the ramifications of that for people in their day-to-day lives, you know, in terms of, like, what should they be doing to protect themselves from these risks, you know, and does it pose a risk to the money they have in the bank that they think is their savings, you know, and does it pose a risk to their pensions, which are in stocks and bonds? And it does. But the media is like they'll scare the pants off people about, oh, you know, the end of the world is nigh, Trump is the new Nazi, he's Hitler, or Putin is Hitler, or Netanyahu isn't Hitler, but they're a bit naughty, but not quite as naughty. But I mean, there's all these narratives, as we know, about all these crazy geopolitical things that happen in the world, you know. So, but they don't join the dots and then go, oh, well, maybe that will have a ramification on our financial well-being, and maybe, as you're saying, alluding to, maybe that will impact the financial markets. So, long story short, I've been expecting a cataclysm for a long time, and because I see the whole thing as a giant house of cards and a Ponzi for a long time, and I'm amazed that the central bank, I thought it was going to collapse. I wasn't in the end of the world sort of Mayan apocalypse in 2012, but I did think that the financial system was going to collapse in 2010, 11, 12. The central banks proved themselves very, very powerful, and they managed to, remember we used to use the term, to kick the can down the road. So that's what they did, to kick the can down the road, but we're near the end of that road, you know, because you cannot just keep going on a keyboard. They're just going to keyboard now and create trillions, like, you know, and people don't realize that's what inflation is. They're inflating the money supply. The price of nothing is going up. It's the value of the euro in your pocket is going down, and you can buy less goods and services with those euros because they're becoming worth less. In the worst case scenario, they become worthless, as happened in Germany in 1921-22. That's the worst case scenario. I don't think that will happen. So I'm not cataclysmic, but I do think we are going to see, we're seeing a monetary reset as we speak, and the currency is going to be devalued versus gold in particular. Gold is becoming money again. I think, Gerry, genuinely, if Bitcoin go to 100,000, I know it sounds extreme, but genuinely, I believe gold can go to 100,000 the same way Bitcoin did. And I'm not saying that's going to happen in the next year or 2 years, but I think in our lifetimes, by the time we're 70 or 80 and we're at some different conferences, we're old men in our rocking will be at 100,000, and therefore it's a great way to invest. It's not investing. It's a great way to save for the long term. It will always have a value. And I want to qualify it. I don't want people say, "Oh, I'm going to buy gold." Your man Mark O'Byrne said it's going to go to 100,000. It's not. Again, it's not going up per se. It's the dollar is going down, and the key way to look at this is that even the euro. So since 1999, the euro's lost 94% of its value versus gold. It's gone from 250 euros per ounce when the euros launched in 1999, and today it's about 4,400 euros per ounce. So 250 to 4,400. But if you invert that and you say, okay, well, let's put this in weight terms, because we need to talk about, in the Bible, they talk about honest weights and measures. And it's really, really interesting. So if you think in weight terms, so it meant that with €1, you could buy 1/250th of an ounce of gold in 1999. So your €1 will buy 250 of an ounce of gold. Today, your €1 will buy 4,400 of an ounce of gold, because your euro is losing value. And that's what people need to, you need to invert. Everything needs to get inverted, because there's so much narratives, and then people just, they can't understand things because it's all upside down, and it's massive cognitive dissonance, So you need to invert it. Most of the 19th century, early 20th century, they used $20 gold pieces. So it was roughly 1 ounce of gold, roughly 90% pure, and that was the money of America in the 19th century, early 20th century. So $20 gold piece. So $1 will buy you 1/20th of an ounce of gold. $1 today will buy you 1/5000th of an ounce of gold. So there's no reason why it cannot be in 20 years' time that $1 will buy 100,000th of an ounce of gold. Because we're going quantum, we are going quantum. There's no doubt about it. The scale of the debt is just going. It's literally, if you look at a chart of the money supply, it's going like that. It's not just a dollar. It's the euro. It's the Chinese yuan. The Chinese are debasing their currency as well. So the one last thing on that is on the economics, because the economists are not talking about these PhD economists, and they're not warning people. Again, it's crazy. But the debt in the world, I just Googled it before, because it's literally going like that. It changes week to week. It goes up a few trillion, We're now at 346 trillion is the total debt in the world, 346 trillion. And the GDP is only something like 120 trillion. So it's roughly 300%. It's 3 times more debt than global GDP. And global GDP, so people understand, is basically, there's 9 billion people on the planet. So that GDP is basically all the goods and services that are bought and sold by every single person on this planet, every single company, corporation, bank. That's the global GDP in 1 year is 120 trillion. So the debt is 3 times that, So that's, and people, it's just, this is the key, one of the key things is the trillion, because when I was started off, $1 million was a big number, and then we started talking about billionaires, and now we're talking about trillionaires and trillions. But a trillion is, you have to think of it, because people's brains get bamboozled. They don't get the scale of what a trillion is. It's a gargantuan number, and they're talking about going to quadrillions soon, So a trillion is 1 with 12 zeros after it, So they literally go on the keyboard and go 1, and they go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's a trillion. We've created a trillion, just like that. It's crazy. Meanwhile, we're all working our backsides off to fucking make a few bob, and these guys just create trillions on keyboards for their buddies in Wall Street. That's the scale of corruption that's going on. And it's going into the military-industrial complex. It's all, we've got corporate welfare. There's no, and we'll give the people the CBDCs, but the guys will own the gold and the silver and the land, and the property. But so a trillion, just so people understand, because if you put it into, they can't understand it from a mathematical point of view, or even a money point of view. But if you put it in terms of time, so a trillion seconds was 32,000 years ago. So $1 trillion is a big number. 32,000 years. You're talking about 30,000 years before Christ. That's how big $1 trillion is, you know. Then if you put it in terms of space, time and space, people understand this better. So space, if you put 1 trillion by 1 foot, so 1 trillion feet, if you put 1 trillion feet from where you're sitting, Gerry, up into space, it will go to the sun and back. That's $1 trillion, like, it's huge. So, but we're not thinking about this. This is the amount of debt in the world. It's 347 trillion. And then they've got fucking derivatives, or a quadrillion in derivatives, you know. I mean, the whole thing is it's a Ponzi and it's a house of cards. And
but the Ponzi scheme never falls stably, like, do you know what I mean? So,
well, yeah. So it could, well, I don't
how do they how do the, you know, this in financial circles, some of what you're saying there is, you know, there's podcasts and there's a lot of people kind of talking in the vein you're talking there, you know, but how do the people on the opposite side of this equation respond to this? Like, how are they keeping all the balls in the air?
Well, they're juggling, yeah, and I think you're right. Like at some stage, they will lose control. I think they are losing control. That actually, the fact that the gold price and silver price has gone through the roof, because people said to me that would never happen because they control it, and it just shows that they don't control it, and they can be very powerful in the futures market. They can go into the digital market, digital futures, and they can just go on a keyboard and sell a few billion of gold and silver futures contracts, and they can push the price lower in the short term. And that's what they did at the end of January, like, because the gold price, I wrote it down just before coming on with you. So in last year alone, 2025, gold was up 65%, like, and the media isn't telling people this, you know. And then and silver was up something like 150%, like, you know, went from $30 to $100, something like that, you know. So massive increase, but they didn't report that at the end of the year. Normally at the end of the year, you know, you would see, oh, this is how the markets did in this year, 2025, but they're pretty much ignoring gold, you know. And then it started really again. They're barely reporting it. And then it was interesting, towards the end of January, they started saying, oh, gold and silver become like meme coins. They're becoming really highly speculative. The dumb speculative money is getting in there. It's getting risky. And it was, when something gets massively overvalued like that, you're going to see a massive correction, you know. That's what we saw. So how are they reacting? Well, they're juggling. They are trying to suppress it, but they can't suppress it because the demand from China, from India, from Russia, from smart money, billionaires. It's not really the little people. Sorry, it is in China and India. The masses are waking up and they're buying a lot of gold and silver, you know. But the masses in the Western world, unfortunately, you know, they've been buying. The younger generation got into the digital stuff. The older generation is in the AI stocks. They're in Google shares. They're speculating on the tech sector, you know. And I think we could see a crash there. But then again, they're putting so much money into the system. The stock markets, like in the hyperinflation in Venezuela, the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe in recent years, stock markets went through the roof, you know. So, but the bottom line is the currency is going to be devalued one way or the other. It's very hard to say what will happen to stock markets. Bond markets are going to potentially become worthless, you know, because these governments are bankrupt, you know. So you're asking, they're juggling, and therefore can they keep juggling these things and kicking the can down the road? Who knows? Maybe they can for a little while longer, but I don't think so. Like back in 2010, 11, 12, they were all working in harmony, like, you know, and you had the G8. They didn't have Russia outside in a potential world war, you know. The Russians, the Chinese, everybody was on board back then. And they all acted, the central banks coordinated together and they worked together. Whereas now, just even the EU and the US are at loggerheads, you know. So it's every man for himself. And that's how the whole system can break down, because it's becoming, each region, each block is going to look after its own interests, you know. And sorry, not their interests, their corporations and their banks' interests, not necessarily their people's interests.
So in terms of where you are today, Mark, with Tara Coins, how has it been going? What's the response to it, and kind of where are you taking your kind of view, which seems to be grounded in a kind of connection? There's almost a bit of the historical, the mythological, and the financial wrapped up into, and the kind of spiritual wrapped up into what you're doing. Is that?
Yeah. Well, I think a big solution to a lot of the problems of the world is a spiritual awakening, a psychological awakening, that we realize that the people have the power. The people always have the power, but we've been disempowered over the years, you know, and they've severed our connection with the land, with the language, with the spirituality as well, you know. And this country, of all countries, we had the Celtic Christianity was really, I think it was really important, because we had a beautiful blend of the old, which was reverence for nature, for trees, for animals. And then obviously Christianity came in. It was love for man, woman, child, you know, and you know, do unto others as you do to yourself. Like, and I think we really, really embrace that in this country, you know. So well, yeah, that's like I want people to remember what we had in this country and Tara Coins is about. If people go on the website taracoins.com, they can actually read the symbols, you know, and what they symbolize, you know. I mean that's Eru down in Inishnock, which is a very interesting place, you know. And it's just we live in an amazing. That's the gold coins. Yeah, I did the silver coins first because I knew silver was fundamental in the value. Then I did 1/10 of an ounce gold because I knew the gold price going to go through the roof. So I want smaller gold to allow people. And now I'm doing 1 gram gold as well. So 1 gram gold is a nice size that is going to become affordable, because 1 ounce gold will become unaffordable for most people, you know. So I've been trying to make it as accessible for people as possible. It's been a bit challenging, to tell you the truth, Gerry, because my costs. I'm like the guy who has the nicest beer in the country, like, but my beer is much more expensive than everybody else's beer because my costs are much higher. Because sorry, you asked the question about the minting. Yeah. So there's no mint in Ireland. They shut down all the mints except for the Central Bank of Ireland, where they mint the euros, you know. So it's interesting. There's been, in this country, we love booze, and I used to love booze as well. And it's our downfall in many ways, you know. But we, like, in this country, whiskey, we just got man on whiskey, and there's so many whiskey distilleries in this country again, and they're making a fortune, like, and they position whiskey as an investment. Like, people aren't buying gold as an investment; they're buying whiskey as an investment. Like, and whiskey can become a liquid. You can't actually sell it; you can drink it, but so it's very risky, the whole whiskey thing. And obviously there's a huge amount of microbrews. But it's interesting, in other countries, in America, in Germany, in Eastern Europe, there's these mints, small mints are popping up, you know, because people are realizing this is important. So I hope in time we may have a mint in Ireland, you know. If any, hopefully you have a few wealthy listeners.
I can definitely tell you, I don't.
I bet you do. I bet you do. You'd be surprised, and I'll give you a good finder's fee if they come my way.
Would it be an aspiration of yours to kind of maybe medium to long term, to kind of have a small mint that you could do the minting process in Ireland?
Absolutely, it'd be great. Yeah, because it's not truly, like, I have to outsource the minting to Germany, so it's got the German technology and the German precision. It's got the Irish heart and soul, so it's a good combination. But it would be great to do it in this country, and in time potentially. But it's quite an expensive thing to set up and all the rest, you know. So right now it's relatively slow, because it's funny. I thought when I knew the gold and silver price would go through the roof. I've been saying that for years, and again, it's not going through the roof. It's the dollar and the euro losing value, you know. So I knew that was going to happen, and I thought that would lead to more demand. It hasn't really. The man on the street still doesn't know about it, because the media is barely picking up on it, you know. And then when they do, they tell them it's a bubble, like, and they're creating this narrative that the gold and silver price has crashed. And it's interesting, even so far, like 6 weeks into this year, they're up roughly 18%, both of them. That's an interesting crash, like, you know. It's up 18% in a year because of that one day where they went into the futures market and they hammered the price lower in the futures market, like, because they just get these. This used to be a conspiracy theory, Gerry, like a lot of things. In fact, when they're actually found guilty, the U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission found J.P. Morgan guilty of manipulating the gold price. And they basically get young kids, you know, the rogue trader on the desk, and he just goes on a keyboard and sells a few billion worth of contracts. Normally late night on a Sunday, when the European and the American markets aren't open, Asian markets have opened, and there's less liquidity, and they can push the price lower, you know. And then the algorithms come in, and they say, oh, geez, the price has gone down, and then the price goes down. But the smart money's buying physical. No one's selling physical, like, you know. Everyone's buying physical, and they use that opportunity to buy more physical. But anyway, I thought when the gold silver price went up that there'll be much more demand, and therefore there'll be more demand for my coins. But there's not, because people just don't know about it, and I don't have the energy or the bandwidth to be doing a huge amount of marketing. I don't have the money or the energy to do it. So I'm sort of doing it slowly. Like, I think there's a nice little cult following sort of being built up. There's nice grassroots stuff happening. So in time, I think it will. I've no doubt it will take off. And people are buying them, and I hear lovely stories. They, you know, they're putting them into sacred places, and they put them into. I love hearing they put them into donation boxes, and they put them into charity boxes. So get it circulated out amongst the people, they put it in their altars, or they, things like that is lovely to hear, that people are actually, and it's because it's a beautiful symbol of abundance, and it is true abundance, because they're metals from God. It is the energy of the sun, of the moon, of the earth, and it's interesting. The science of it is that they came from either asteroids or giant supernova explosions of stars. So there's potentially some form of stardust, so sort of universal metals that are come into this planet, universal energy. So sorry, just finish it out. So the intention is just for people to be aware of them, to buy them. I think that we will protect people. So I have a very good relationship with a distributor in the US, and they're very good guys, and they're pushing over there. And I think the Irish Americans get it a little bit more, obviously, than the Irish, because we have been well and truly conditioned to see gold and silver as from the past, and we just don't understand it. We think it's risky, actually, but the Americans do get it. So Irish America is a big focus. So hopefully we can, get it going there. That can generate a few bob, and then I can use that to sort of get it going more so in Ireland, And one other thing, my costs are high. So because my minting costs are high, because I'm doing really small volumes, it means my wholesale costs are high. So even the distributors here in Dublin, there's 2 distributors, Marion Gold and Gold Bank, and they say to me, geez, people love them, but like we tell them the price then, and then they say, well, he's 1% more expensive than him. And they want value, especially if you're going with $5,000, 1% in your head is quite a lot. So I do understand it to an extent, So I need to get my costs down. So again, if you've any wealthy listeners on your podcast, get them on to me, because
I get them on to me first, and I'll send them to you then.
Well, I'll send to me, and I'll send you a good referral fee.
What was I going to say? We're rolling at an hour and just over the hour there, Mark. And I suppose we'll wrap it up. But I want to wish you all the best with it. And
very good, thank you.
Beginning, Mark is one of the people that I've, you mentioned the tours and stuff. He's well known to people questioning a number of the narratives that play in this country over the last 5 or 6 years, especially. So, there's that aspect to it. So, is there anything else, Mark, you want to finish up with there just before we finish chat?
No, the harp. We'll finish with the harp. Because interesting, I think the harp is we love music in this country, and the history of the harp is absolutely fascinating, And Guinness took it and they trademarked it, and we need to take that symbol back, and it goes back to it's interesting. Some people recently are trying to say the harp is a crown symbol. I really don't think it is. I think it's in the mythology. It's associated with the dog who's one of the Celtic gods, and then it's in the Druids as well. So it's we love music. Music brings people together. There's so much division in the world, and we are in this time of fear, and then they're using fear to create anger, and then everybody's judging each other and canceling each other. There's just so much division. We need to start, just accepting other people's opinions, and they have to accept ours. It's a two-way street. There needs to be more tolerance, basically, because society's just going very, very intolerant and very, judgmental. So we need to be a little bit more forgiving of each other, and forgiving of people who have just different views, because they're on a different journey, or they're consuming different media, and we're all in these echo chambers, and we just need to sort of say, lads, come on, we're all in the same team here. We're all about looking after ourselves and looking after our kids and having a bit of crack, and enjoying life. It's short, so why get sucked into all this war?
No, I'm kind of with you. I'm with you, I think, I'd be with you there, in kind of staying out of those realities of presented on our phones as much as we can. But anyway, thanks.
You've been good, and the community is the big thing, and not being sucked into the whole digital gulag, so to speak.
That's exactly what it is. Anyway, Mark, thanks a million. I'm just gonna end the recording now.
Fair play, Gerry.
I'll have your details and all that in the description and pinned comments.
You're very good. Really appreciate it. Yeah, they get me on x.com and LinkedIn and tarotcoins.com. And fair play, Gerry, and keep up the good work as well. You're